knew it was like, wow, I got to see the Great Pyramid, and I did all that. Egypt is fantastic. I climbed the Great Pyramid then too, and that was something. Watch the sunset. Back then, you could kind of do stuff like that. Actually, you're not supposed to, but it's almost, in Egypt, it's kind of like India. If you just bribe enough people, you can do anything. So, and I traveled in Sudan, but I was running out of money, and I was lucky. I got a job with a Kenyan American catering company that was running the kitchens for Chevron Oil. Chevron was doing oil exploration in Sudan at the time, so I suddenly got a really good job, and sort of with the oil company, and I was able to bank quite a bit of money, and then I was flying around Africa a little bit on the oil company planes and stuff like that. And I traveled for 2.5 years through Africa eventually, after quitting my job. Ended up in Cape Town in South Africa, and I worked in a sporting goods store there, ran the camping equipment department and whatnot for a while. And then eventually I actually bought a ticket in Zambia all the way to Tokyo, which would take me back through the Seychelles, and I was in the Comoro Islands, I was in Somalia, I was in Djibouti, I was in Yemen, and ultimately, and I was in Saudi Arabia even. And I actually returned to India, and my mom came and met me. I went back to Kathmandu and did more climbing and trekking there, and then went to Southeast Asia and to China, and I became one of the first people to ever just travel around China, which was now about 1980. I was gone for 5.5 years, and up until that time you had to go to China in big groups, and but I was one of the first people to just go into China as an individual, and I was actually with a friend from Ohio, a guy named Bill Barrett, and so he and I just bummed around China for a couple of months, and that was great. I did then finally return to the U.S., and I moved to Illinois, but then I also started traveling in South America and Central America, and also to Pacific Islands and Australia and New Zealand and stuff like that. And so ultimately, over this, 10 years or so, I was really had sunken cities, Lemuria, ancient India, the Rama Empire, and stuff like that. So until recently, mainstream archaeologists, and although a lot of people don't know this, even archaeologists, but what mainstream archaeologists were saying that the ruins on Malta were the oldest ruins in the world. And they're megalithic. That's what we're seeing here, is these ruins on Malta. And they were the oldest ruins in the world, going back to around 7,000 BC, actually, about 9,000 years ago. And these are some of the ruins here at Malta. They are gigantic. There's another sister island to Malta called Gozo. It has supposedly the oldest ruins there, Gigantija, which is what you're seeing here. Huge walls, very worn, and a fascinating area. And at least until recently, the oldest ruins in the world. Malta apparently at one time, and all of the Mediterranean was really like a big valley. And Malta today is an island, a couple of islands just off of Sicily. And but in ancient times, there were all of these pygmy hippopotami, pygmy elephants, other deer and large animals were running around Malta. Today it's kind of a small rocky island. But what happened was, there's a cave there, the cave we're looking at here, the Dargalam Cave, and some kind of tidal wave hit Malta and wiped out the whole island and washed all of these animals, or many of them, into this cave, the Dargalam Cave. So this cave was evidence of some kind of cataclysmic flood and tidal wave hitting Malta, wiping it out, and ultimately flooding the Mediterranean at that time. And the Mediterranean has over 200 known sunken cities. And of course, they weren't built underwater. So So the Mediterranean is bigger and deeper today. What were islands in the Mediterranean weren't islands during that time. And just recently, actually, between Malta and Sicily, they found this obelisk that had fallen over, and it's underwater. It's like in about 100 feet of water. So they know it's a man-made object, and it apparently was this obelisk. So here we go, that kind of a thing. And this is a huge, is a giant piece of stone that's apparently fallen over and broken, and would have broken essentially in this cataclysm and tidal wave that literally flooded the Mediterranean. Up until that time, the Mediterranean would have had just a few lakes in it. It was almost kind of like the Dead Sea or like Death Valley or something like that. So that's this kind of interesting thing. But now, in the last just 8 years or so, they're now mainstream archaeologists. What they're saying is that the oldest ruins in the world, and megalithic ruins, is at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And my wife and I went there a couple of years ago. What's at Göbekli Tepe? Göbekli Tepe is in south central Turkey. It's actually near to Syria.
Oh, man.
And today, that area is a very dangerous area because of all the problems in Syria and stuff today. What you see at Göbekli Tepe, among other things, are these giant T-shaped megaliths, and they are megalithic. They're probably weighing maybe like about 5 tons or so. Anything really that's weighing a ton or a couple of tons is megalithic for sure. And many megaliths get up to 50 tons, 100 tons, even 500 tons, even 1,000 tons and more. And we'll be talking about all that. At Göbekli Tepe, you see these T-shaped megaliths, and they have these animals carved in relief on them. Foxes and vultures, other things, kind of snakes. Here's an aerial photo. So exactly what was going on at Göbekli Tepe, they're not sure. Once again, with the mainstream,
Fuck me, I almost maxed out there.
they don't want civilization going back really more than 10,000 years. That everybody's in the Stone Age before that. But Göbekli Tepe is nearly 11,000 years old. It's going back to around 9,800 BC, something like that, making it the oldest really known ruins. The excavations were really being done by a German university, a Catholic university, and Turkish archaeologists. But what they said about Göbekli Tepe, which is a little bit odd, was that they don't want civilization to be really older than that. And so what they would say is kind of paradoxical statements like, yes, these are, carved, planned megaliths and stuff, but there was no civilization. There wasn't really culture. There weren't cities. Yeah, nobody, they're not out there building roads and bridges and walls around cities. No, they're still these hunter-gatherers. But for some reason, they got together and started, carving these megaliths and putting them up. Which sort of implies organization and, in a sense, civilization. So this is what Göbekli would have more or less looked like when it was built. And it is megalithic, and although things in Malta and other places are much more impressive. So another strange thing about Göbekli Tepe was that they buried it. It was purposely buried, apparently, by the people on top of a hill. So it's actually on top of this hill, and then they buried it purposely, which must have taken quite a bit of effort in themselves. Here we can see where Göbekli Tepe is and stuff, and right up in here, Göbekli Tepe's here, this series over here. Now, in this area over here is another place called Baalbek in Lebanon, and we'll go there right now. So Baalbek in Lebanon really has the largest megaliths that we know of in the world. According to mainstream archaeologists, and this is one of the things that I have to really understand and know as a fringe archaeologist, they would call me. And that is, what's the mainstream explanation of things? I mean, they have to explain all this stuff too. They have to have an explanation. Sometimes their explanations are okay and pretty good. Sometimes their explanations are very bad. And that's where I become the critic, and I write about all this stuff in my books, of course. So mainstream is saying that Baalbek in Lebanon is Roman built. It's a Roman temple to Baalbek. It was built by Romans around 100 AD or something like that. But really what Baalbek is it's got Roman temples on top of this massive platform that's much older. So like in many archaeological sites, you have different levels of work and time frames. Particularly when you're making things that are so gigantically huge, like megalithic buildings, you've got, they're indestructible. They're going to be sitting around for thousands of years. They're not going anywhere. Ruins in Egypt, as a good example. Most of the temples and things you see in Egypt, they're 3,000 years old at least. Some more like 4,000 or more. And they're still standing today. And tourists are walking through these buildings that are thousands of years old, and they should last for another couple of thousand years. So these ancient builders were building things that were basically indestructible, things that they wanted them to last for thousands of years, and they have. Our own buildings today are only built to last 100 years maybe, or 200 max. But the ancient peoples were building buildings to last for thousands of years. So at Baalbek is what you can see here, these huge, huge ashlars. They weigh around 1,000 tons each. These huge blocks here that are the base. They're gigantically huge. They're the size of a railway car, something like that. They weigh so much. Then even larger megaliths are at the quarry at Baalbek. They weigh even more than 1,000 tons. We'll see those in a minute. But the problem is why are you going to build, and why are you going to quarry 1,000-ton giant block of stone that is almost impossible to move? And then you're going to stack it up in walls. I mean, they have been moved. But they seem to be doing something so incredibly difficult. I mean, it boggles our minds. Why would they want to build something with such giant blocks of stone? We don't do that today. But part of the answer is that it had to be easy for them. It couldn't have been so incredibly difficult as we see it. They had to, just cutting the stone, the pouring it, the removing it, and then to move it and lift it up and stack it into walls. I mean, they had to have, in my mind, some kind of levitation, some kind of anti-gravity, some means of making the stone weightless, in a sense, and then moving it. Here's a friend of mine, a British pilot named Ralph Allis, standing near one of the quarried stones, weighing over 1,000 tons. They're just gigantically huge. They've recently, at the quarry in Baalbek, they have found this new block. It was buried under a bunch of rubble. They say that it weighs 1,650 tons. And this would be then the largest known quarried block of stone anywhere in the world. There may be other larger blocks somewhere, perhaps underwater, but that's what we've got going here. It's mind-boggling. Even today, we don't have cranes and things, movable ones that can move something like this. In ports, you do have some fixed cranes that are built that can move and pick up something this big like a port facility. But all those kind of cranes are specially built. There's not that many in the world. In fact, just a few months ago, this crane in Mecca collapsed while it was lifting also something building this hotel, and the whole crane came down on this building, and it killed like 100 people. So moving and lifting these things is just so incredibly difficult, but archaeologists have to explain it. They can't just say, oh, well, we don't know how they moved these things. Oh, they had to use some kind of anti-gravity or levitation. So how are they going to, how would they move it? Well, a French archaeologist did try to explain it. And this is his explanation right here. And what he said was that they would build a cage around the blocks, and then put in a kind of an hourglass sort of notch in the stone, which they would have to later somehow level out the stone. And they would put these little notches up here, and then those things could go, they're like kind of an anvil. They would fit in small stones, and they fit into the block of stone, and then you'd have pulleys and ropes, and you're building this giant cage around this 1,000-ton megalith, and then you've got all these people, and you're pulling on these ropes, and you're going to move this thing a couple of inches, and then you're going to have to do it all over again and rebuild the cage around it to move it. I mean, this is the only way they could figure out how they're going to move these things. And it's kind of dumb, really. It's not going to work, but they had no other explanation. And that's part of the thing, it's the same thing they say in Egypt. It's just, we'll talk about this more when we get to South America. Well, the Pharaoh would just order these things done, and however many thousands of people it took to drag a statue around or a block of stone, they just did it. And it was all brute force and just kind of primitive pulling and pushing on these giant megaliths. Now, when I was saying that Baalbek is really Roman ruins on top of these earlier megalithic ruins, that is what Solomon's temple is too in Jerusalem. It's the same thing. And this giant block of stone that you can see here, and the girl is standing here, and there's other perfectly fitted smaller blocks, but they're also megalithic, just right about her shoulder length there. But this giant block, which they call the Western Stone, is also some huge 1,000-ton block of stone, and then these other blocks are up on top of it. You could not see this stone until relatively recently, just about the last 25 years or something, because this is part of the Wailing Wall of Jerusalem, where the Orthodox Jews like to go and they pray on the wall, and they put little notes and stuff in it. And so they cut a tunnel along it, because there were all these other buildings. And how come this keeps going off? So then they went through and they cut this tunnel, and because of this tunnel, you can now see this block of stone. And it's hard to get a good picture of it, but there it is. And but we don't even know how much it weighs, because we can't see behind it and see actually just how large this stone really is. So they are able to guess at just how large this thing is. So now let's go to Egypt, to Abydos. Abydos is a megalithic site that's apparently pre-Egyptian. Abydos is actually in southern Egypt, near to Luxor. And what's at Abydos is also this thing, which is slightly different. You go at the back of the Egyptian temple, and you're in this place, and it's called the Osirion. And so the Osirion is down in a swamp. It has no Egyptian hieroglyphs. It's massive. It's the reason that the Temple of Abydos was built apparently by dynastic Egyptians is because these older ruins are here. And what they've got is things like, the Egyptian government spent literally decades pumping water out of it because it was down in a swamp. But you see here some of these notched blocks, and you see these little knobs and stuff that are coming out. And then, well, archaeologists, yeah, we're going to see that now in South America. And we don't know, archaeologists don't know why these things have these knobs. So here we go. We're going to go now to Cusco in South America. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time in South America for looking at this. So we'll see, now notice the knobs are on here too. This is, in fact, the famous stone of 12 angles. It's not by any means one of the largest stones there, but it's very much articulated with all these angles and cut and perfectly fitted together. It also has those little knobs, which are, archaeologists have thought that those knobs had something to do with somehow holding the blocks up while they very tediously chipped away at all of these edges because they had to fit perfectly. And that's one of the things about in South America and other places too, is that not only are they building with large blocks of granite or limestone and basalt in some cases, but they're perfectly fitting the blocks together. And how they would do that is another problem too. And it would seem really that they're using power tools to do this. They're fitting the blocks together. When you have blocks of stone that are perfectly fitted in this jigsaw polygonal manner, and it's the highest, most advanced form of really megalithic stone engineering, because the blocks are all fitted together and locked in. And when an earthquake hits the wall, the blocks jumble and move, but they're locked together, and so the wall will not collapse. This site is an unusual site, and it's exactly like the places in Peru, in that it's a jigsaw pattern. But this is in northern Greece, near to Albania, and it's a place called the Necromonticon. It was only discovered in 1960 by German archaeologists, and it's the same kind of construction that's at Cusco. So here we have, again, this polygonal blocks that are cut but perfectly fitted together. Right above Cusco is Sacsayhuaman, this gigantic walls. They're zigzag walls. They're also polygonal, fit together. Here's an aerial photo of it. They're put together in this zigzag kind of walls together. There were towers that were here at the very top. They've been destroyed. The Incas and the Spanish had a big battle here at Sacsayhuaman. And this is where the Spanish really defeated the Incas finally and conquered the Inca Empire. Huge blocks of stone. Mainstream archaeologists are saying that, well, yeah, this is all built by the Incas. And they only like 100 years before the Spanish conquest. The Incas are very recent to us. And these ruins, these giant ruins, they're not, according to mainstream archaeologists, they're not thousands of years old. They're literally only hundreds of years old. Say about 800 years old, just a little bit before the Spanish got there in 1500 or so, 1530. So you see the polygonal blocks, the way they're fitted together, it's huge. And then there's a giant field in front of it, which you could land like airships and stuff like that. And the other things that you see there at Sacsayhuaman are very strange. As you walk out the back towards the quarry area, you see things like this, where giant upside down staircases, huge blocks of stone that have been carved and articulated, but for no reason. I mean, it's not any functional thing. It's like somebody has got these power tools and they're just playing with them and practicing, cutting up the stone, slicing it. And not because it's so difficult for them, but they've got some kind of plasma cutter or whatever that's cutting, melting stone, or
what's up, Jersey? What's up,
grinders, wheels,
what's up, girl?
diamond,
What's up, Journey? How you doing?
wheels and things like that. The mainstream also, again, they would cut through solid stone like this and to these tunnels and things. The mainstream archaeological explanation is that, well, yeah, the Incas were practicing, on these things so that they would get things right. In Egypt and in Peru and stuff, they're saying that they're using just stone hammers in their hands to do all this.
Got this crystal I found. I found a bunch of crystals.
Iron tools and things like that to do this thing. So it's the whole idea. The people are primitive. They don't even. The Incas supposedly didn't know about the wheel. They didn't have writing. Yet they were doing things allegedly that are just impossible to do like us. So the mainstream, again, they have to explain all this. Well, the Incas just, they quarried these giant blocks of stone because they wanted to build with giant blocks of stone. And then they would have to drag them up these ramps and things like that, put them in place. And it wasn't just enough to put these giant blocks, into walls. They had to perfectly fit them together as well, which must have been so difficult. So how could they do it? Again, my point is always that, they're using power tools. They've got levitation.
How's you? I'm good. How are you?
Gravity. They're not doing it because it's hard for them.
Saying hey.
They're doing it because it's easy. Something they can do easily. Here's Machu Picchu, the famous secret city in the Andes. It's a secret city. It's up on top of a mountain. It's a megalithic city. The Spanish never knew about this city. It's down the Urubamba River. It's going sort of into the jungle, actually, of the Amazon. There you have also this.
I'm good,
famous,
that's good. That's awesome.
What they call it, the Wall of Three Windows. It's megalithic, perfectly fitted granite blocks. Here again are some of the blocks, the perfectly fitted blocks there at Machu Picchu. You see again those curious knobs that are on the blocks. We're still not sure what that is, what that was for. One idea with these knobs is that they had a way of like melting the rock, of putting some kind of what they call a plasma cutter into the rock. In the Star Wars movie, Revenge of the Sith, I think, or something, and the Jedi Knights guys they're on the space station and they're locked in this room. It's right early on in the movie, and the guys on the space station realize, these Jedi Knights are here and we got to kill them now. So they basically lock them in this room. They bring them into this room, and then the doors all slam, and then they're going to gas.
I would never find those. You're not going to lie.
No worries. What they do in the movie,
I had to go somewhere super rural, like super into the forest, like where that granite rock outcrop is.
Door,
and all these crystals were located within
and they
there.
Start melting it.
I had to go super rural.
This door with their lightsabers to get out of the room. Early on in the movie.
In the Canadian Shield, the granite outcrop made 1 billion years ago.
And George Lucas and Star Wars movies are great. He's a genius. And it seems that, and to try and explain these knobs, what they had was something like a lightsaber. And it would be a plasma cutter. A plasma, in this sense, is an electrified gas. Like a neon light is a plasma too. But a plasma cutter would be exactly like a
That's epic, Joe. Thanks.
Lightsaber.
Yeah, there's glaciers here 10,000 years ago, right? So that rock is like 1 billion years old, but the glaciers made it visible. Like there's about 1 kilometer of ice over the landscape, and when it melted and scrape away the
with a
landscape
hammer.
left.
So,
Like,
and that makes it
it
this
released
like,
all these
kind of
quartz that
lightsaber
had
sword, and it
lava
doesn't
that had dried
tip
under
then at the
land,
end.
which made the
Otherwise,
quartz
it would just
crystals, you know.
keep going out. So if you
That's
had
epic.
something like that,
Thanks.
so you, and that's this
Your
may be
epic
the
journey.
answer to
You're
these
epic.
knobs.
Seriously. Thank you for
That
being here. You're awesome.
they're melting the rock so that it's
The best journey.
it's a little bit pliable, almost like a putty, and it helps them kind of shape the rocks. Although I believe they were also cut with saws and stuff. But as you pull the rock, the lightsaber out, and the rock is kind of molten, as you pull it out, you're going to have this little knob. I don't know. This is about the best explanation I've really been able to come up with here on that one. We still don't know what these knobs were. So we're at Machu Picchu. Again, these more stuff there. The giant, perfectly fitted blocks like this, and notice the big lichen patches. That's indicative of great age. Lichen grows very, very slowly, eating rock. Just these. If you brought a geologist in to try and date this, he would probably say, yeah, this wall has been sitting there for thousands of years, and that's what it would take for that much lichen to build up on the blocks. Between Cuzco and Machu Picchu is this other megalithic site called Ollantaytambo, and it's on the Urubamba River too. So when you get to Ollantaytambo, the main thing is what's called a sun temple, and it's all up here on top of these cliffs. To get up there, you go up these steps, and then you cut up. You're going up here, and then you cut up into this area. So we'll have a look at some of that. So you get up there, and you start going up these stairs. You start seeing this perfectly fit andesite granite. You see the knobs. You're coming up. You see these walls like this, big patches of lichen there, and more knobs. It's megalithic. It's quite amazing to see. Perfectly fitted, again, jigsaw walls, indestructible, perfectly fitted. I mean, we couldn't even do walls like this today, in my mind. And then you get up to the top, and this is what you see. You start seeing all these giant blocks just lying around, and the main thing the tourists see there is this wall. This is where you stand with your group and take some photos and all that. And they call this the wall of the 7 megaliths. It's also got big knobs and things on it. It's very unusual too because of these very thin pieces of granite right between the blocks. This is really, really unusual. Still fitted together. These are huge blocks of stone, weighing probably hundreds of tons. And again, they call it a sun temple. They don't really know what it was for, what happened. There was a battle here between the Incas and the Spanish too at one point. So as you go around the corner, this is what you see. Giant blocks of stone, but you see some unusual things here. So what you see is giant block of stone like this, and then it's notched right here, and here's the other wall. This weird pillows on it. They're not sure what that is. It might have to do with somehow the pouring. But then you have this crummy rubble fill. That's about 7 feet tall, that. So once again, the mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh, well, yeah, the Incas just dragged this giant, 200-ton block of stone up here, and then they just filled it in with a bunch of crummy rubble right there. So what's really clear, I mean, it's obvious I think, to people when they're there, except for mainstream archaeologists, is that, yeah, here's these giant blocks. I mean, this was meant to have another giant block perfectly fitted next to it. So you have 2 different levels of construction. You have your Atlantean or alien construction or something here that's, mind-blowing. And then you have your Inca construction, which is all this crummy rubble. I mean, it's absolutely clear that's what's going on. But mainstream archaeologists won't go for that. No, the Incas had to build all this stuff just before the Spanish got there. So you're looking around, and there's these same blocks and stuff again, and it's strange. What it looks like today is exactly what it looked like during the Spanish conquest, and it's what it looked like during Inca times. I mean, nothing has changed, and these blocks are just sitting around doing nothing. The mainstream explanation is that the Incas just never finished. They never completed what they were building. Building some temple, they dragged these blocks up there. Suddenly the Spanish invaded them, and they didn't have time to finish their gigantic building, you know. But what seems to have happened really was that either some kind of cataclysm destroyed this whole thing, and I mean the Incas too, they were incapable of really moving any of these blocks of stone around. And they're heavy, perfectly cut granite blocks. And you can see the articulation that's going on with these here. Does this shine through? And yeah, the way it's coming, this articulation. So they've already notched and cut it, doing things that beyond just cutting the blocks and stuff. And then on some of these giant blocks that are sitting there, you see these things, and these are very important, and I write about them in my book on ancient technology in Peru and Bolivia and whatnot, and that's these things. These are called keystone cuts. They're cut in these blocks. They can be a T shape or like an hourglass type shape, and there's always got to be they span 2 blocks. The molten metals or a metal clamp is then put into this. There's always got to be another block with a T-shaped thing on the other side. And what it's to do is to hold these giant blocks together in a sense. And although they're so huge and big, you wouldn't think they would be going anywhere. But this was the method that they used. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the mystery here is that absolutely they're using molten metals and pouring them into these blocks. And so how are they getting these molten metals? And yeah, and that's another thing. The foundry, you've got to mine the ores. You've got to wash the ores. You've got to put them in furnaces. I mean, you're going to have a whole Bethlehem steel kind of operation, to do all that kind of stuff. So, and that's something that archaeologists don't usually address. I mean, they know they had these metals, but they don't see where they were coming from and how, and all the technologies that they were using for that. So you've got these blocks like that. Here, once again, you can see this little keystone cut on it. But if you go around the corner, and here's another block of stone here, it's also got this T-shaped keystone cut on it. But this is in the wrong place. This is not where the stone should be. And the keystone cut can't be on a vertical wall because molten metal has to be poured into that. So this is, and of course there would be another block, but next to it with a corresponding T-shape so that the metal could be poured into it. That's not what's going on here. Like a giant staple, yeah, but it can't be on a wall, like a vertical wall. It has to be down on a horizontal wall. Yeah, and it's a clamp, and so yeah, the clamp spans the 2 stones. We'll see more pictures of this later as we go. It spans the 2 stones, and in theory, it helps hold them together in an earthquake or something. One of the things that really helps, that I'm always interested in when I go to these places, is to go to the quarry sites, where the quarries are. So we're now going up to the quarry that is that's across the river. And I've been up there a couple of times, like 3 times. And the last couple of times we actually rode horses up there. So here's the Urubamba down here. I'm taking the photo from high up on this trail, looking across the valley. Here's where Ollantaytambo is, over in here, all those megaliths we were just looking at. It's interesting to look at this valley because these fields, which are like potato and cornfields and stuff, they're done in such a way as to give an image of a pyramid. Do you see? Can you see the pyramid there? In the, it's and even doors and stuff like that. It's like the fields have been engineered in such a way, and you can only see it from when you're up by this quarry, to give you this illusion of some kind of a pyramid. But this was the strange thing. Then they had to drag the blocks down. They had to go across this river. And they couldn't figure that one out. They couldn't figure out how they might get them over the river. Because they're saying that, they're dragging these blocks. So as you get up to the quarry, what you see is, it's an unusual quarry. What it is a giant scree field of this mountain. It's like solid granite, and it's like somebody has blasted the face of these cliffs, so that, like even with some weapon or something, so that all of these big, giant boulders just kind of came down and fell down, and then they would go up to the biggest boulders, and they would start cutting it and slicing it, and they would do the dressing of the stone at the quarry, and they would create these giant blocks of stone, like the size of a semi-truck or something. And here's one of the stones, and you can see how it was being sawn. What must have been up there was some giant saw that was like literally sawing these blocks like a loaf of bread. And then for whatever reason, they abandoned or stopped working here. They were cutting the stone block, but they never moved it in the end. What's also up there is this giant cut stone wheel, which is unusual. It's like some Fred Flintstone wheel or something. And it's sitting up there, and it baffles archaeologists too, because the Incas weren't supposed to know about the wheel. And yet they're making these giant stone wheels, and they don't even know what they were for. So, and it's also perfectly sliced and smooth. I mean, these things are not rough at all, unless for some reason they've been exposed. So the cutting of these, I'm maintaining that they have to use giant power saws, huge machines that are cutting the stone. And then after that, you're going to have to, once you quarry these giant stones, now you have to move them. And then that's even more difficult, ultimately, than the quarrying and the cutting. Yeah, that right. And they have to drag them and lift them. And here's the other thing, and I can't go into all this in much more detail in my ancient technology in Peru and Bolivia, including discussing the mainstream explanations and stuff. But there's a French-Swiss stonemason who is a professor now at the University of California at Berkeley. And he's the one who's tried to explain these things in a more normal way. And what he says is that, they do the quarrying, which is difficult enough. And then, according to him, they would, because in South America, they don't really have heavy animals like oxen or anything like that. So they would harness people up into a giant harness, like horses for a stagecoach. And you'd have, literally, according to him, hundreds of people, 800 people or something, all, harnessed up to drag these blocks forward. And, there's a calculation for that. You calculate how heavy this stone is, and, okay, this stone weighs, 400 tons or 200 tons or something. Okay, well, we're gonna need 800 guys pulling on these ropes to move these stones. This is literally the calculations they've made. There's problems though with that still, and that is because we're going up onto Ollantaytambo it's on top of a cliff and a knife ridge, and so they couldn't figure out where all those guys would be standing. There wasn't room for them. And what's more, they can't turn a corner that way. I mean, with 800 guys all pulling on these giant blocks, all they can do is pull it in a straight line. It can't suddenly make a corner. So, you know, the mainstream archaeologists are saying like, well, yeah, we've kind of got this figured out, but, you know, not quite. Because there's just not room for all these guys to be standing there making stuff. So, now we're still in Peru, and we'll go back to Cusco. And this is we're inside what's called the Coricancha, the Sun Temple. And in the Coricancha particularly, there's like two doors like this, and this is one. They've got plexiglass in front of it now, but they're doorways, they're megalithic, and they have all of these little channels and holes and things like for cables or something. And it looks like some kind of device, some electronic device or something was in this, like a big television screen or something like that. It had cables coming through. They had made holes in the stone so the cables and stuff like that could come through and be attached to this thing. It's very complicated and articulated, all these things. It's quite unusual. And you stand there looking at it thinking like, whoa, what is all this about? Whoops, I'll go back. So again, the mainstream normal explanation is, well, the Incas built this, and they hung some tapestries there, you know, with some ropes and stuff. You know, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of work just to hang some tapestries or something. So we'll keep moving up higher into the Andes to Lake Titicaca area. Half of Lake Titicaca is in Peru. The other half is in Bolivia. And along the western side of Lake Titicaca and the Peru side, there's a couple of megalithic sites that are pretty interesting. One is called Silustani. It has all these many towers. And then there's also this one that not many tourists really go to. It's called Cotimbo. It's on top. Both of these sites are on top of mountains, on top of flat top mesas, actually. You have to hike up a hill to get up there. You have to park down below, and you go on this hike. On the way up along the trail, you see this, where it's on a cliff face that you sort of pass by. And curiously, there's for no real reason. It's like some guy with his power tools just decided to sort of slice along here and then polish this whole part of the cliff for no reason. Just, it's like he's got his power tool with him, he's playing with, and he's like, well, you know, I'll do this, you know, like. So anyway, then finally you get up to the top, and you see this. You see these large buildings and towers. They're megalithic. And the towers themselves are also have these pillowy shaped blocks. They're perfectly fitted together. And what's unusual here now is that you start seeing like these snakes are carved on it. And other animals too, in relief. Pumas and condors and things like that, you're seeing. It's hard to do this too, because when you carve something in relief like that, that means you're cutting away all the stone around it to leave that part coming up. Now, remember at Göbekli Tepe? Those T-shaped megaliths, they also had these animals like this carved on it. It's exactly like the same. And back in Cusco, which isn't so far away from all this, some of the blocks of stone that you see around Cusco have these snakes carved on them like this in a wavy line. Most of the stones and things in Peru and in Cusco don't have anything on them, but a few have these snakes that we're seeing. Well, what's interesting is if you go to northern Iraq, to the temples of the Yazidis there, this is this very, very ancient religion that is still in Kurdistan in northern Iraq. And they still have the temples for this is a religion that is still going on. They claim it's the oldest religion in the world. And the temples there have these snakes on them, these curved snakes. That's what's on a Yazidi temple. Very, very similar, like identical in a sense, to with the snakes and stuff that we're seeing in Peru. As you go along the west side of Lake Titicaca, going to the area where normally we get on a boat and go to the island of the sun, you see this thing. It's called the door of Amaru Muru, or the Devil's Door. It's this door that's carved into solid rock, into something of a cliff face. It's a very strange geological area here. And you go up to this thing. It's like a doorway, a false door. You get up. It's about 20 feet high up there. And then this lower little notched doorway, it's about 6 feet high. And you've got other cuttings and notches there, and some bird guano on it. And it would seem that some other structure would have been sort of built into this, or something that's completely gone. People claim that it's kind of an interdimensional doorway or some kind of portal, a Stargate or something like that. People will go here and meditate, perhaps, and some have claimed to have had, amazing experiences, I suppose, whatnot. But now what's interesting is that if you go to Egypt, like in Giza, you will see the same thing, these false doors that are going nowhere, just carved into solid rock. This one is on the Giza Plateau, right near the Sphinx and the pyramids. So it's just a curious thing that, what they're doing in Peru, they're also doing in Egypt, and we don't know why. Here's Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is the highest known navigable lake in the world. It's about 12,500 feet in altitude. It's very deep in many parts of it, particularly the northeast side. It's about 800 feet deep. And the southern part of the lake is much shallower. And as you, at the museum there, they know there's underwater ruins around the lake. There's even supposedly a gold obelisk that these Italian divers claim they found. Scuba diving there is very, very difficult because of the high altitude, and it's very, very cold. So a golden obelisk on the northern side, underwater, of the island of the sun. No, I haven't, and it's hard. You would have to bring your own scuba equipment. You apparently need to dive with like mixed gases and things like that. It's very tricky. No one really dives there. Jacques Cousteau did go to Lake Titicaca and do some diving. Now, one of the strange things about Lake Titicaca is that it has seahorses in it. And today it's a freshwater lake now too. But geologists cannot explain that. They don't know how seahorses would be in Lake Titicaca. Seahorses really, live in tropical oceans, like in coral reefs, like Indonesia or something like that. That's where you really find seahorses. And how seahorses would be in a lake that's 12,000 feet in the Andes, they can't figure that one out. They're like, well, yeah. Yeah. And what it kind of suggests is that Lake Titicaca was at sea level at one point.
Or they came out of the sky from storms, like fishbowl.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, like raining fish or raining frogs or something like that. Raining seahorses on you, yeah. And that's an interesting thing, yeah. Whether a tornado or a water spout would just suck up a bunch of water and then dump it there, or a big UFO, going and sucking up part of a coral reef, bringing it up to Lake Titicaca and dropping all these animals in, see which ones survive or something. Well, James Churchward, who wrote the Lost Continent of Mu books, he wrote first book, Lost Continent of Mu, like 1924. And he wrote then other books after that, the Children of Mu, Sacred Symbols of Mu, Cosmic Forces of Mu. And this is one of his maps. And he had been sent from India, from his guru in India, who had a secret library and stuff, and he was sent to go out and search for evidence of Mu. And he went out across the Pacific. This was all the late 1800s and whatnot. So his explanation was that the Amazon Sea, the Amazon was a sea, South America was as a tectonic plate, was down. Lake Titicaca area was a kind of Panama Canal of its time, between what was then the Pacific Ocean going into the Atlantic, and that in a pole shift cataclysm that sank Atlantis in the Atlantic and the Mu in the Pacific, and then the South American whole tectonic plate just was risen up. And so areas that were at sea level were suddenly high in the mountains. The Amazon Sea then became just the jungle basin that it is today. So that was an interesting idea. So I thought I would toss that in there. At Tiwanaku is at just some miles from the southern shores of Lake Titicaca. It's in Bolivia. And this is one of the most famous things that you see at Tiwanaku. This is what's called the Gate of the Sun. And it's standing there by itself. It's been split in an earthquake. It's what's called a monolithic doorway. It would have been part of other structures. You can see how you're coming down here, and there's a big notch right here, and then other parts. So this would have been part of a wall. It's interesting to look at the jams here, the double jam of the doorway. This guy in the middle is supposedly Viracocha, and he's wearing a feathered headdress like we associate with Indian chiefs and stuff like that. And he's got these two staffs on either side of him. And what's interesting here too is that there are tears are coming down his eyes. And they call this supposedly the tears of the sun. And those tears are really molten metals, apparently. Gold, liquid gold, and that's the tears of the sun would be gold. But that's part of the whole, in my mind, the whole secret of Tiwanaku is that it was a huge metallurgical plant. And that's really what it was for. It was a place for processing ores, washing ores, going through the furnace. There was tin there. I mean, this was like the Bethlehem steel plant of the Andes, at least at the time. I think also that Cusco was some kind of mining and metallurgical area too. At Tiwanaku, also are these giant statues. Some of them are 40, 50 feet tall, made out of sandstone. They dug them up, and some are in the museum, some were taken to La Paz. The guys have these kind of strange fish scale pants on. They're wearing turbans on their heads. They have big goggle kind of eyes. They're oddball looking characters. They're holding strange things in their hands. And what you also see as you walk around parts of Tiwanaku are these small sluice holes, and this was for water. I mean, this little doorway you see at the bottom is really for water to move through. It's very small. So if someone to go through that would have been, they'd have to be like a midget or something like that. But somehow they diverted a river there. Tiwanaku must have had all this water and be like just like a water city with canals, water coming down. They even pumped water up to a lake, an artificial lake on top of a pyramid. There's a sunken temple there and what they call the Kontiki statue. There's all these faces on the walls. Ancient Aliens did a whole thing there with that. And he's the famous Kontiki of also Thor Heyerdahl of the 50s, the Norwegian archaeologist who did these crossing the oceans with these reed boats and stuff like that. He's got a big thick mustache and a beard, American Indians do not have facial hair. They don't grow mustaches and beards. They don't have to shave. He's also in the tiki position. His hands are in the tiki position. One hand over your heart, the other over your stomach. That's the tiki position. And if you go to Tahiti or New Zealand or something like that with the Polynesians, they'll sell you these little tiki medallions and stuff, and they're always doing that with their hand on their heart and their hand on their stomach. That's called the tiki position. So here's another kind of picture of the tiki guy, just so you can see that way he's got his hands and stuff. Well, if you also go to northern Iraq, into Kurdistan, they have statues there, and they're doing the same thing. They have their hands in this tiki position. So here they're going through. There we are. Here's again a statue from northern Iraq where they're doing this tiki position of their hands. Here also at Tiwanaku is the pyramid of Akapana. This was an artificial pyramid with a lake on top. The lake is in what's called the Andean cross, which is a kind of a Swiss cross type of motif. So this reservoir was probably then used to when they would release the water, it would wash down through all these tunnels, and probably in my mind it was to wash the different ores, and then those ores would then go to the furnace where you could extract whatever, the gold, the silver, the tin, the copper, and stuff like that. So here's South America. There's Lake Titicaca. Tiwanaku's right over in here. We'll see Lima and whatnot's there. And go ahead. And here's an aerial satellite photo of Lake Titicaca. And it's really two main lakes. The deepest part of the lake is in this part. It's about 800 feet deep. This is where they cross. This is the island of the Sun over here. This is the lesser lake. Tiwanaku's kind of down around here. This lower lake area here, the lesser lake, they say that there's sunken cities there, ancient ruins, and they say that there's UFOs come out of there too. There's a lot of UFO activity around Lake Titicaca, and UFOs are said to come up out of the water there. So it's almost like there's some underwater UFO base there at Lake Titicaca. Here you can see the
what's up, Big Angel?
Lake. So again, it's this area right around in here, supposedly, that has these sunken ruins and stuff like that.
Just seeing me get pinned, homie. What's up, buddy?
Also on Lake Titicaca is where you have the reed boats that they're built with these tortora reeds. They use them on the coast. The same kind of reed boats were built in Egypt and Morocco, also in Iraq by the Marsh Arabs and things like that, also on Easter Island. Reed boats are unsinkable. Even if the boat breaks up, all the parts will still float. There's a very shallow draft, so reed boats are also very good for going over coral reefs and things like that. Boy, it's pretty big. Yeah, I mean, it's like the size of one of the Great Lakes, kind of. Yeah, I don't know the exact size. And so now, this is the Pumapunku ruins here in Peru, in Bolivia. I mean, it's only about a half a mile away from the main ruins of Tiwanaku. At Pumapunku, you see these giant sandstone slabs. This is also where those H blocks and things are. You see here what I was talking about earlier, the keystone cuts. Here are huge, huge cuts for giant metal clamps to be poured in. You see these huge platforms. Most of it has been destroyed. Whatever was at Pumapunku is almost completely gone. Big slabs also of granite, and then you have all these amazingly articulated blocks of stone like this, and this kind of articulation that we're seeing here is completely unnecessary. It's just like fancy decoration. So once again, They would have to be using power tools to do this kind of articulation. This is not something you can do with a stone hammer in your hand, bashing something out. And who's ever doing this, I mean, they have such sophisticated equipment that doing these decorations and articulation on these stones is no big deal to them. It's not such a giant effort as we might see right there. You see, yeah. What's that? Okay, yeah, 3D printing and stuff, yeah. Right, and we're about to look at all these H blocks in a minute. Yeah, I mean, right, I mean, that's a good idea that they somehow poured the rock, and these stones, there's a kind of advanced concrete. That's an interesting idea. It's what we use today so effectively, Portland cement, as it's called, concrete. I mean, we're pouring liquid stone. But this is
man. I missed you, buddy. Hope you're good, buddy.
What we were looking at back here, let's see, there we are. Yeah, that's granite. That is granite block. But if they somehow could have a
I upped my weight to 165 and then 205, my man. Thanks to you, buddy. Thanks to you.
The other way to do it, apparently, which and we'll get into the H blocks in a moment, is that they've got these, that it's a CAD program, but it's cutting stone, and it would have to be diamond type tools that are cutting the stone. Okay, so I just wanted to show you again these giant, more of these keystone cuts. And this is all pre-Inca. Mainstream archaeologists admit, yeah, this is pre-Inca, of course. But so here are the keystone cuts. So and we saw the other keystone cuts at Ollantaytambo. So what we're seeing, this is essentially evidence that the makers of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are the same ones who built Cusco, who built Ollantaytambo, who built Machu Picchu. So the same people are building all of these things, and they're all thousands of years old. And the Incas didn't build any of it. They occupied buildings that were already there. Here we are with the H blocks. We're filming the Ancient Aliens right now. There's me and Brian Forster. So we're doing this whole thing. This is also another block that can be found at Pumapunku. This is Christopher Dunn, my friend, the British-American engineer who studies all this stuff very carefully. And he has all the tools to look at these things. You can, just to show how perfectly level these blocks are, and there's like little devices that you run them along with got a wheel, and it shows you how perfectly straight and smooth something is without any kind of bumps or things. And also what he's looking at here is a block of granite that's been cut, and then it's got a saw cut through it, and then there's all these little drill holes. So how are you going to do that? He's looking at the block here. I mean, it's not some huge block. It's just sort of lying there. And here we go. Here's the close-up of it. So what's so strange here is that not only is it cut and articulated, but over here it has this very fine saw cut and then little drill holes. And just making that saw cut, I mean, that has to be done with a power tool. It can't be done by and even some chisel or something like that. I mean, this is power tools that are doing this kind of stuff. It's a very precise thing, and it would take a diamond drill to drill down into those holes. This is another part of Pumapunku. If you walk around the back, it's been this typical trenching that archaeologists do, just digging a trench just to see what's underneath there. And what they found here is parts of walls and what looks like conduits for water or something. And there's these keystone cuts are there. The clamps are missing. You can see them there on these blocks. You're not allowed to actually go to this part of Pumapunku anymore for some reason. And this area here too, which is nearby, They keep you out of here for some reason now. But look at these blocks of stone on these piles of mud and muck. What seems to have happened here is that some giant tidal wave from Lake Titicaca has hit this place, the building, wiped it out, and probably the earthquake or whatever that had also been part of it. And then as the blocks and things fell down, and there they are now, sitting on pillars of mud that are 3 feet high and whatnot. So yeah, this is evidence of this building being destroyed in a cataclysmic flood and earth changes, and then the blocks are sitting there with all this mud and muck. And it's only been recently that Bolivian archaeologists are even uncovering this. I asked, I was there one time and it was an American archaeologist from Berkeley. She was she was a woman. And I asked her about it, and I said, well, don't you think that, Tiwanaku and Pumpunku have been hit by some, giant tidal wave or catastrophe doing all this, destroying the buildings? And she said, oh, no, the Spanish just pulled these buildings down. I mean, it didn't even make sense. I couldn't believe that she would say that. Yeah, now here, this is another weird block there that's at Tiwanaku, and this is also articulated. But this was strange because in this area over here, right at the bottom, this little part here, it's like the right in here, the block itself had gotten chipped and a notch out of it, and they had taken some kind of super concrete, like you were talking about, and patched it with some kind of like a liquid stone or something. And you can see how it's different. It's some kind of like a concrete, but it's harder. But it seems that the stones themselves, they are genuinely going to a stone quarry, and cutting these blocks of stone out. This is another one too that's right in that same area. It's actually on top of the pyramid there. And what's difficult here, and as being there with Christopher Dunn one time, as he said, you have this curved, this has almost been cut by a lathe or something. You've got a curved surface, but where you have a flat surface coming together and meeting a curved surface, this area right in here. So you have this whole thing, and it's perfectly smooth and curved, but where this curved surface and this flat surface come together here, that's very, very difficult to do. That, again, has to be done with a power tool. You can't just bash that out. Something is cutting these things, and it's like even a CAD program, a computer-aided design machine that's doing it. What is all over Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are these monolithic doors, and this is one that's fallen over. You can see it's cracked, but a monolithic doorway is itself very unusual. It's a doorway cut out of one solid piece of rock, rather than say, a wall on one side, and a wall on the other side, and a lintel across the door. No, that's not good enough for them. They want a doorway that's just one big, massive piece of granite, and that's unusual. Here you can see some of the H block type things in the background. You see this doorway sitting down. It's also been split, having fallen in an earthquake. You can see these holes on the bottom. This is the bottom of the doorway. So those would have had to fit into stone sockets, or some kind of metal sockets or something like that. We're not exactly sure how they did all that. Well, there is another place that has monolithic doorways like that, and it's Persepolis in Iran. And the Persepolis is also a megalithic building, and the doorways there are monolithic. They have the same kind of door jamb. They are almost identical to the monolithic doorways that are at Tiwanaku. So, and these are really, Iran. This is in Western Iran, quite near to Iraq. But even this double jamb that's coming in, where they haven't just made a plain doorway, they've articulated the jam as you're going in and made it a lot fancier than would be. I mean, I would basically say that, yeah, this has got to be, it's got to be done with power tools, and these things are heavy too, of course. So here's a diagram of what one of these monolithic doorways looks like, how complicated they are, the way the structure. I mean, it's very precise. All those things that they're doing. All right, and this is in the museum there. Here's one of the metal clamps. So this is what you have the clamps, you have the keystone cuts, then you have the metal clamps that are poured into it. However, these keystone cuts, they're all over the world. These ones are in Egypt, and they're done as like an hourglass kind of a thing. So you have the keystone cuts now. We have them in Peru and in Bolivia. We've got them in Egypt as well. And this is a wall in Edfu in southern Egypt, and it's full of keystone cuts too, but it's very strange. I mean, this is a wall that is built from some other building. The ancient Egyptians themselves tore some other old building down, and then and these blocks had all these keystone cuts, kind of what we saw at Ollantaytambo. And so they've just kind of put these blocks from some other building into this wall. In a few places, they actually matched some keystone cuts, but in other places, there's just a cut by itself because they're not using the keystone cuts. I mean, there's in the original wall, there would have been the molten clamps and stuff there, but now they don't need them now because they're going to do something else with it. So you have it in Egypt as well, and it's remaking things. And in fact, if you go to Vietnam, to central Vietnam, Da Nang area, there's a megalithic site there called My Son. It's right by where when there was a North and South Vietnam, it was just on the border in South Vietnam. It got bombed accidentally a couple of times during the war. Anyway, here's keystone cuts here too, exactly like the ones at Pumapunku and at Ollantaytambo. Here they are, those same T-shaped keystone cuts, exactly like what's in South America. Now, there's a very unusual way of fitting giant stones together. That people would independently invent this in Peru or Bolivia and also in Vietnam or something is basically impossible. I mean,
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it so much, Journey and Angel. You are the best.
And also, this is also in My Son. These are other hourglass type keystone cuts here. And in fact, this is cut into basalt, which is extremely hard stone. When we were there and walking around, I noticed these immediately, and I hadn't expected to see them. This was about 6 years ago or something, and I pointed out to our guide who was taking us around, and I said, "Do you see these cuts here in these stones?" I said, "These are keystone cuts," and he had never noticed them before. He had no idea what they were. So I explained the whole thing to him, and he was like, "Wow, that's really cool. How interesting." He had not paid any attention to this, nor do archaeologists in general. I mean, this is proof that that these builders were worldwide going around. Here's another one of the keystone cuts in basalt. If you look at the bottom part of down in here, yeah, I mean they've done some very fine cutting and articulation.
Thank you so much for being here, Journey and Angel. You guys rule. You girls rule.
Lock in there. I mean, this is very unusual precision type of cutting, and again, this can only be done, in my mind, with power tools. Here's what My Son looks like today. It's not got a bunch of giant walls, but it's megalithic, and it's a fascinating place, let me tell you. And there's other sites like this around Vietnam. Their main place